This is Lisa Piper with Miracle Deliverance, and this is session 14. I'm talking about helping marriages. For more videos and handouts, you can go to miracledeliverance.com/helping marriages. Now, today I'm going to talk to you about a subject you will need to have your people covering in prayer. And here's why. When the Lord begins changing, if you have already begun working with them, in marriage and the Lord has started healing, there is a tendency for a spouse to still treat the other spouse pre-healing. I have an example of a man and woman I've been ministering to, and the man has truly begun to change. I'm telling you, he repents easy. He's forgiven. He has seen where he's prideful. He has seen where he's been arrogant. He has seen what has harmed his wife, and he has repented, and he is trying to make those changes. But what is keeping the success rate down of transformation is that his wife has not forgiven at the same rate. And so when she sees him, even though he's a different man, she still sees the old man. She treats him the same. She expects him to hurt her. Now, you know, there are repercussions for bad behavior. So I'm not saying that if a man or a woman repents, you just quickly act like it never happened. There's a healing process that has to occur. And one of the things that a person who is healed or begun healing, what they can do is not command that the spouse recognize the change, but live the change. That's the best way. If you have a man or a woman who has their go-to response or emotion was anger, just let them not be angry anymore. You can tell somebody all day long that you've changed. They don't need to hear it, especially if they've lived for years with certain behaviors. They need to see that modeled in front of them. It's difficult to do. I know it is, especially when God changes you inside out. You don't feel like the same person. You've forgiven yourself. You've let it go. You're ready for a new life. And your family, your spouse, your children, maybe your pastor, other people, they see the old man. Nothing you can do about that. It's very frustrating. One of the women I saw who had the most traumatic change, it was 4 years before her family was like, I think it's going to stick. Now, for those of you that are changing, or when you're talking with someone that's changing, encourage them not to let that be a point of going, oh man, you know, if you've tortured somebody for 20 years, they may need some convincing. Unfortunately, a lot of times we tell our spouses we'll change. And by the time we do change, they just don't believe that anymore. So here's my recommendation. Encourage those you're ministering to just live it out. And when it gets difficult, put some things in place. For example, one woman who tormented her husband for like 10 years before God radically changed her life. He didn't want to forgive her. He didn't want to see the new person. And I said, just be that new creature and love him no matter what. Refuse to go back into the old habits, because once you're healed and once you're delivered, you're set free. But occasionally we can slip back into those old ruts of behavior. And it's difficult to get your mind renewed when there aren't people around you supporting and encouraging and saying, hey, yeah, we see the changes, but the same thing that set us free is the same thing that will keep us free. And it's not man's opinion. So encourage them to just live the life free. And if they're living with someone that's like, I know you're not changed, or you'll go back the other way, prove it differently by just loving and being kind and living out the freedom. Now, that's the encouragement I give to the person who's changing. To the person who still isn't healed, I would say pray about it and ask the Lord what level of trust you can give the person. You continue working on forgiving and healing. But if they truly have had an encounter with God, you will need to move toward not treating them like you formerly treated them or like they formerly behaved. Now, one of the sad things I've seen is like one of the spouses commit adultery. And the other spouse says, I want to make it work. I'm going to forgive them. So they reconcile. Yet in the thick of things, when they begin thinking about that person they have, that their spouse committed adultery with, or they start fixating on it, they will regurgitate that and bring that back up. I hate the word fair, because who knows what fair is, but I really think that's not very fair. When you have forgiven someone, when you have let it go, that's what it means. You forgive it and you let it go. That does not mean that you don't need to process that out. But holding something against someone that you've already let go and you've told them you let go is just a really bad way to live out healing. Jesus certainly doesn't do that with us. If you're ministering to someone who begins treating their spouse like the old person, they're going to need some time to come in and get some healing themselves. Now, there are things that take time. I wish that every time I met with someone, I could just say, okay, you're healed, you're done. I have seen times where Jesus has healed the heart of someone, yet it took them a little time to open that thing up to trust people. So one of the gifts that a man or wife can give to each other is time to heal. That means no pressure to accept that I'm changing, and no pressure to just dump everything out at once. Okay? So I think it's very important that as the couple is being healed, that they allow the other spouse to change. They give them room to change, and not just mentioning their old mistakes all of the time. Now, with that said, I do want to say one other thing. When it comes to reconciliation, let's say that they're broken apart and maybe they're separated, maybe they're divorced and working on reconnecting. I don't know what that is, but I find it very unprofitable for them to come back together too quickly without seeing change. If one spouse says, I have changed, if you recognize I've changed, then you need to let me back in the bedroom, back in the house, back into hugs, back into the marriage, whatever it is. Listen, if they have changed, let them live it out. Especially if there has been someone verbally or physically abusive and they say, I've changed, I've changed, I've changed. How are you going to know if they've changed? Well, one thing is they're going to be willing to do things they've never done before. If someone is really committed to a marriage, they will do what they typically do not want to do out of love and consideration for the other one. Some signs that they are not ready to reconcile and that they really haven't changed is if they don't take personal responsibility for their role in the deterioration of the marriage. If they really can't see how anything was their fault at all, then I would say there's no healing there, because what I have seen in marriages, even the most innocent person has sought the Lord and said, God, is there anything I could have done differently? And they found something. So if they can't say, I could have done anything differently, if they still want to point and say, well, if you hadn't this, I wouldn't have done this, that's not a good sign that it's time to reconcile. If they're not humble, that's not a sign that there is some change made there. If they want to cover everything up in darkness, you know what truth and freedom and healing looks like? It looks like light. It doesn't look like hiding anything. Now, there are times during reconciliation that the couple still may not be willing to give up certain things. We don't cross their will, but we can show them the consequences for certain things. If I'm ministering to a couple, I would say, allow God to change your spouse and allow God to change the way you view them. One of the really quick ways to do that is in a session is ask the Lord to expose or reveal how he sees their spouse. Nothing will line a person up in how they treat each other like if they see that person how God sees them. I remember my children were arguing one time, And I got onto both of them and I said, listen here, I know that you're fussing because this is your brother, and brother, this is your sister, but I want you to know that's my child. To my son, that is my daughter that you want to hit. And to my daughter, that is my son. And one of them told me later that was just a revelation because they never considered their sibling as my child. It put a whole new wrap on it. So when they see their spouse like God sees them, it will help them to be able to treat them like the new person that God is creating them to be. Now, lastly, if you find that there is a spouse who cannot let the old person go, that's going to be a difficult situation until they're willing to. That marriage is not going to work. I think the spouse that is coming along, that is getting prayer, have them just be in prayer for their spouse and not to give up their own freedom, to seek the Lord out, to go ahead and continue to change and glorify him and just pray, because there's no telling what God will do. In a later session, I'm going to talk about what happens when it doesn't work out, when there is no hope for reconciliation, which is difficult, especially for people of faith, or if there's one spouse that's really hanging on. But we'll deal with that in a later session. Thanks for joining me today. Hope to see you in session 15.